Rubber Revelations.
In the 1980s, the most famous faces on television were made of rubber.
It's the Tebbets and the Thatchers and the grey Major that people remember.
And they appeared on a revolutionary show that made satire an essential part of the nation's viewing habits.
In a sense, there was a need for that show. There was a need for that at the time.
It broke TV taboos, caused outrage, and showed the royals as a real family, warts and all.
Yeah, but what bloody good do they do?
And it meant that for the first time in the history of British politics, the population could recognise most of the members of the cabinet. That show was Spitting Image.
To me, Spitting Image is still the most exciting thing I did.
And the first series, everybody said, was just terrible.
Yeah, they said it was awful.
The second series, they said it was...
not as good as the first series.
And it just sort of went on like that, really. It just...
The third series, they said, where are the glory days of the early
show
episodes?
one that we all hated.
Would you like to order, sir?
Yes, I will have a steak.
How'd you like it?
Oh, raw, please.
And what about the vegetables?
Oh, they'll have the same as me.
That'll be absolutely thank you.
The show everyone loved to hate lasted from 1984 to 1996. But our story starts in the late 70s with graphic designer Martin Lambie-Nairn, who worked on LWT's heavyweight political programme Weekend World. For light relief, he had another show on in the background.
There was a programme on BBC Radio called Weekending, which was a satire show, and I thought it was the best thing. I just thought to myself, wouldn't it be brilliant if you could actually visualise this thing?
Has anyone got any ideas? Aha!
One night, and I have to say it really was, in the middle of the night, I suddenly sat up in bed and said, it's puppets, and it's Roger Law and Peter Fluck. And that was it.
In the early 1980s, Peter Fluck and Roger Law were big stars on the political satire scene. They started out as cartoonists, but became famous when they moved on to making 3D models of their targets, which were then photographed and appeared on magazine covers around the world. Fluck and Law seemed to be the perfect puppet masters, but could they master a puppet television programme?
It's quite clear we knew absolutely nothing about television whatsoever, about budgets or studios or puppeteering, directing, script writing, script editing, the whole nightmare world, you know.
So to help Lambie-Nairn and Fluck and Law develop their idea into a viable TV show, they were joined by Tony Hendra, British-born editor of National Lampoon, America's biggest satirical magazine, which regularly published Fluck and Law's artwork, and John Blair, a documentary maker who knew how to pull a programme together. But what they really needed was someone who had done comedy on TV before, preferably in a sketch show format, like Not the 9 O'Clock News.
I have the good fortune to be the first Liberal leader for over half a century who's able to say to you at the end of our annual assembly, go back to your constituencies and prepare for government.
With the know-how and a team of sketch writers at his disposal, Not the 9 O'Clock News producer John Lloyd saw that there was only one solution to the Spitting Image problem: hiring John Lloyd.
I rushed around there and said, I literally am the only person who's got the work experience to be able to do this show, because I want to do it. I have to do this. This is going to be the next big thing.
As far as the writing and the organisation of a television programme, a funny television programme is concerned, he was just, gold.
But could Golden Boy John Lloyd sell Spitting Image to a broadcaster as effectively as he'd sold John Lloyd to Spitting Image?
So they say, puppet show. Oh, a kid's show. So no, it's for grown-ups. Well, how can it be? It can't be. It's if it's got puppets in it. So, well, it's going to have, politicians and stuff. And people say, well, why would that be funny? What would be funny about having politicians as puppets? So, well, and it's very hard to explain.
Because up until that point, I'd spent 2.5 years traipsing around with a little folder with this idea in it and going and visiting Jeremy Isaacs and people like that because I thought it should be a Channel 4 programme. It seemed obvious to me this was a Channel 4 programme.
Channel 4 wasn't the only broadcaster to say no thanks to the puppet show. LWT passed, and so did Thames. So Lloyd began a journey round the ITV regions, which led him all the way to Central TV in Birmingham, where the director of programmes was Charles Denton.
Central must have been the last people we went to. And Charles saw what little stuff we had, and he immediately said, "I have 22. This is marvellous."
I think I led a sheltered life. I didn't know that John had previously offered it to Thames or to LWT, and that they'd both turned it down, but I was not going to turn it down. I think that we needed a little bit of healthy political disrespect and perhaps a bit of anarchy in the weekend schedule.
He was taking a terrific risk because I could imagine the one person that he really had any trust in would be John Lloyd, who was a proper pro, because the rest of us were a bit of a motley bunch. So, and it was not a proven technology. Nobody had done this before. The nearest they'd come to doing anything like this was the Muppets, and this turned out to be 1,000 times more complicated than the Muppets.
It also turned out to be about 1,000 times more expensive.
From memory, I think I committed £60,000 to a pilot. £60,000 at the time was a lot of money. It was certainly more than you'd commit to a sitcom pilot or a game show pilot. It was getting towards drama money, really. It was always going to be a pricey show.
With Charles Denton's money, the Puppet Men made a pilot in 1983. Unfortunately, we can't show a clip of it here because somebody lost it. Geoffrey Perkins, who went on to become a producer of Spitting Image, remembers seeing it at the time.
I thought it was absolutely brilliant. It was an extraordinary show and inevitably was going to be a huge hit.
With huge expectations and an even bigger budget, production went ahead on a full series and ITV's publicity machine went into overdrive. At 10 p.m. on Sunday the 26th of February 1984, 8 million people tuned in to see the very first episode.
What was the first show like? Well, all I can say is that none of my friends would speak to me the first 2 or 3 shows. They said, well, it's just shit. You know, it's just complete crap what you think you're doing.
I didn't actually see Spitting Image last week, but it was disgusting.
The best thing about the first programme was it allowed the second one to happen and so on, because we had to learn on our feet.
Oh, this is terrible, terrible.
And I think the trouble was that the pilot they'd taken months over, and suddenly they found themselves on this weekly turnaround that they just really didn't have a system to make at all.
The actual making of the programme was incredibly complicated. They drew cartoons first, then they made sculpted heads, then they made moulds, and then they poured in latex and they baked it. You know, it was like this enormous kind of weird Terry Gilliam art block where they had racks of, it would say hands, left, hands, right, heads, generic, and there'd just be heads kind of lolling there, sitting on tables, or one fallen on the floor.
Yes, sir, Arafat.
Here.
Ronnie Corbett.
Here.
Lester Piggott.
Adding to the complications were the frequent backstage bust-ups between the people who made the show.
586. Oh, my God!
There were a lot of people involved. There were 2 or 3 producers, and there were Roger and Peter Fluck and Law, who'd had a really successful career as sort of satirists in their own right, and then there were lots of new writers, and I think there were a lot of people vying for space.
Ian Hislop and Nick Newman were no strangers to the cut and thrust of popular satire, having earned their spurs at Private Eye magazine before joining Spitting Image as chief political writers.
And it was the puppeteers saying the scripts weren't any good. The
voiceover people saying the scripts weren't any good.
The critics
saying the scripts weren't any good. Yeah. Yes, I remember that bit.
I didn't know what I now know, that the team were at each other's throats for half of the time.
We had an absurd situation with 5 producers. Fluck and Law, Hendra, Blair and me, and the idea was that every single thing had to be decided unanimously.
It was quite obvious fairly soon that Tony and John Lloyd wouldn't work as a team of producers. It was either one or the other.
And Hendra took the rap. It could have been me, could have been anybody.